the youth during the election process. Given that the youth make up a large part of the South African population, it has been seriously concerning that only a third of them actually showed up at the polls to vote on election day this year. This is disturbing due to the great impact that they had played collectively in the freedom struggle before democracy. Well, joining us now to talk about this is Frederick de Ridder. He is a director at Mkhulu Freehate. Good to have you, Eric. Thank you very much for being with us here on the program.
Thanks for having me, Leon.
You know, it was quite ironic that these elections were dubbed the Born Free elections, and yet we saw such a small percentage of the Born Frees actually going out and voting. What do you think the problem was?
I think the biggest challenge is, and we've said this repeatedly throughout the campaign that we've been running since last year around the election, is that there's a disconnect between, I think, where politicians see the country going and where the broader population sees the country going. I think the majority of young people think we can do better than we're currently doing. And the gap between what politicians are putting on the table and what they really want from the future, I think, is the real crucial difference. I mean, we saw higher registration numbers than ever before, almost 25 million voters in total. But we saw lower numbers turn out on the day. And I think that speaks to the fact that what we want more than anything are politicians that finally return the fight for the people of South Africa to the center of debate, as opposed to fighting for power or self-interest.
Yeah, so the youth are, it seems that the youth are more aware of this. It seems that the youth want more from the politicians than what they're offering, and I'm summarizing it from what you're saying. What do the youth want? I mean, in a nutshell, what would they like to see coming out of politicians' mouths?
I think if you look at youth unemployment, for example, it's stagnated at almost 50% for more than a decade. I think how young people think about the ballot box as a solution and their expectation linked to that is on the decline. I think what they really want are politicians to really say, listen, these are the issues. We're prepared to work with our colleagues across the spectrum to find common ground and really find workable solutions to deal with these challenges. If you look at the violence post the election, for example, those are forms of political participation. Young people don't just see the ballot box as something where they can express themselves. They see these other forms of participation as equally valid. So I don't think we should discount them as apathetic. I think young people are very prepared to take the future into their own hands. And unless political leaders lead, young people will take it upon themselves. And the consequences of that would be very different.
Yeah. You know, the amazing thing was that during election week, I just happened to be working at another function. I was emceeing an event, and I was working with a lot of Born Frees and a lot of young South Africans, young, excitable South Africans who are doing very well for themselves. Now, I was looking at their thumbs to see, have they voted? And I can tell you, out of the 5 people that I spoke to that were of the youth and are the Born Frees, not one of them voted. And I asked them why. And all of them giggled and laughed and said, oh, does it really make a difference? I don't know. I feel like it doesn't make a difference. And that, unfortunately, is how they feel. Or do they feel that way? Do they think that their vote doesn't mean anything?
I think if you look at how much progress we've made in the past 20 years, it hasn't been nearly as comprehensive as it should have been. We need to get the economy to the stage where it's absorbing a lot of the young people that are not in employment at the moment. It needs to bring people back into the economy. We need to fix the education system. And I think the fact that they haven't seen as much progress in these areas as they know is necessary, and their faith and trust in the system to deliver, I think is declining. So their ability to relate what they've seen happen and what they want for the future is where the discrepancy lies. I think, but also there's a tendency for young people to say, listen, I'm going to leave the politicians to do what they're doing, and I'm going to do my own thing. And to an extent, I think that kind of self-reliance is productive. But at the same time, we want people participating, and we want them to believe that where the political leaders are taking us is where we want to go. And there's a serious wake-up call, I think, to be for all the parties about their ability to capture the imagination of the majority of the electorate, which we've seen is not something they're capable of doing. And meeting that gap is really crucial in the next 5 or 20 years.
Yeah. Do you also think it's maybe this is a dumb question, but it's a question that I feel is relevant because it did work for me when I was the youth voting for the first time. My parents played a very big role in this as well, in saying, you know, it's your country. This is your right. You need to shape the future. It is your choice, and whether you like it or not, you got to get out there and vote. Is it perhaps also a parent thing? There is no voter education, whether it comes to universities or at home or at other places where the youth predominantly go?
I think there is a generational divide. I think young people are accustomed to being told that this is something that you have to do because people died in the struggle for this right.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly valid. But the next step is really the imagination and the inspiration that's got to be coupled to that. My generation, the millennial generation, really needs that component as well. We need to understand why it's important for ourselves. And I think the gap there is really also crucial to address.
Yeah.
And parents, I don't think, have relayed the extent to which these factors are determining necessarily. And I don't think that young people necessarily have the experience to understand the extent to which voting is crucial. Because at the end of the day, whether you vote or not, people will be elected into office, and those people will have a controlling interest in the future.
It's true. But I also found that the older you get, the more you realize how important the vote actually is.
Yeah.
That's a fact. That is a fact,
Yeah.
because you want to ensure that your kids have got a better future. You understand it more. You follow it more. You're reading the papers. You're doing all of this. The youth perhaps also still living in a, they're having fun and they're enjoying their lives, and perhaps they leave the politics to the politicians.
Yeah.
But we need to change that. We need to make it more accessible. I need to ask you, what was the percentage of young voters that actually participated in the election as opposed to those who registered? Do you know these figures at this point?
I have a rough idea, but I stand to be corrected.
Okay.
I think it's in the 18 to 19 category, it's about 30%. In the 18 to 24 or the 18 to 30 category, it's also very low, below 60%.
Wow.
So it's very low. And I think in the next election, I think young people need to really take it upon themselves and realize that that they really are the controlling interest in terms of electoral politics in South Africa. And if they assert themselves in the next round, they really can make a significant change to the way the politics happens in South Africa.
Yeah. We look at where we're sitting right now, 20 years into democracy. Life has progressed quite significantly. But for some of the youth out there, they are unemployed. Their education is at a really bad level. Job prospects are not even there for them.
Yeah.
And they've got a lot of other pressing issues, whether it comes to drugs, violence in society. There's a high level of abuse in the young communities. And, these are the realities. Again, they're perhaps feeling despondent.
Yeah, I mean, a large part of the youth population is angry. And I think they have reason to be angry. And Gauteng, for example, I've seen some stats where they estimate that up to 65% of people my age, about 25 or so, are unable to find work and won't find work in the future. And I think that's a real reason to not participate. But at the same time, it's up to the people who control the various platforms in our society, especially political and civic leaders, to really inspire people and do the education work, to really make sure that the next generation is not saddled with the same issues that we face today.
Yeah. How do the youth express their dissatisfaction? Is it, can we say that when we see protesting happening in the streets, burning tires, running riot, is that only the youth? I mean, is that the way of speaking these days?
I think the majority of protests are, I mean, in the limited experience that we've had, have a high participation from young people. But again, that speaks to the fact that the community leaders in these spaces, for example, are not really productively applying those forces and those energies. Again, if political leaders all the way down to branch level were really interested in addressing the critical challenges that we face, I think they would see a very different reaction. I think young people are completely prepared to consider alternative forms of participating, as opposed to violence or public violence and public protest. But at the moment, those channels aren't being created and not being facilitated. And the national narrative is not conducive to that kind of activity. When people feel as though the politicians are so tone deaf to their issues that they have to resort to public violence, burning libraries, burning IEC tents and so forth, there's really something in the system that needs to change radically. And I think the message in this election shouldn't be that the parties have conducted themselves well and that they've improved their kind of margin in the electorate. I think their focus should be on how to really capture the imagination of that next generation, because how that process unfolds will really determine how the future looks.
All right. Thank you for talking to us. Very interesting discussion when it comes to the youth participating here in the elections. And it's just quite disturbing. 30% of the 18 to 19-year-olds actually participated in this election. And we were so excited about the fact that this was the born-free election, the election where nobody was, I suppose, under any form of oppression in the country in the run-up to these elections as this age gap. And yet they didn't participate at all. 30% of, I think it was 1.3 million born frees.
Yeah.
Was it 1.9 million was the total born frees that were able to vote, but only 30% of them actually came out and did exactly that. Frederick, thanks for talking to us. Frederick de Ridder, who is the director at Mkhulu Free Hate, talking to us here about the vote. All right, let's take a break. We'll see you after this. Stay tuned.